The keeper beneath Hollowridge. The breach. James Whitaker slammed the reinforced steel door shut as gunfire erupted upstairs. The echoes of shattering stained glass from the Hollowridge Chapel's windows reverberated through the stone corridor. His wristwatch glowed faintly. 11:47 p.m., April 12, 2030. 13 minutes until feeding time, and a team of armed intruders had chosen the worst possible night to storm the chapel. James grabbed the meat hook from its wall mount and sprinted down the dimly lit passage. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting stark shadows across the rough-hewn stone. Behind him, the steel door shuddered under the impact of what sounded like a battering ram. Good luck, he thought grimly. The door was designed to contain what lay below, not to keep intruders out, but it served both purposes well enough. His watch ticked to 11:48 p.m., 12 minutes left. Rule 1. Feed at midnight. No exceptions. James had made this run 2,192 times over the past 6 years, but tonight was different. The air felt charged, heavy with intent. An explosion rocked the chapel above, sending plaster dust cascading from the ceiling. These weren't petty thieves after the collection plate. Someone had sent professionals, armed to the teeth, and they meant business. At the first checkpoint, James punched in his access code, fingers steady despite the chaos. The biometric scanner hummed, reading his fingerprint, and the heavy door slid open with a hiss. Rule 2. Never enter the feeding chamber without proper clearance. 11 minutes. The corridor stretched another 50 yards to the feeding chamber, carved deep into the bedrock beneath Hollowridge, a small town nestled in the Cascades of Washington state. Another blast shook the building, louder this time. Whoever these intruders were, they weren't here for relics or rumors of hidden treasure. They knew something too much, perhaps, about what lay beneath the chapel. James reached the feeding chamber, a circular room hewn from solid rock, its centerpiece a steel grate covering a shaft that plunged into darkness. The feeding chamber. James couldn't see the bottom of the shaft, even with the high-powered flashlight clipped to his belt. But he could hear it, a low, deliberate shifting, like a massive weight settling in the depths. He opened the industrial freezer, its cold air spilling out in a frosty cloud, and retrieved tonight's offering, 60 pounds of raw beef, still dripping blood. Rule 3. Only raw meat. Never cooked, never seasoned, never frozen for more than 48 hours. The entity below was particular. 10 minutes. The steel door behind him rang as something heavy struck it again. These mercenaries were relentless. James activated the chamber's lockdown sequence, and thick metal barriers slid into place, sealing him inside. Even a tank couldn't breach the chamber now, but the lockdown was temporary. In 90 minutes, the barriers would retract automatically. If he wasn't done by then, things would get messy. He attached the beef to the feeding apparatus, a motorized pulley system designed to lower the meat at precisely the right speed. Too fast, and the entity grew agitated. Too slow, and it started climbing. James had seen the aftermath of a climb once, early in his tenure. The cleanup had taken 4 days, and the memory still made his stomach churn. 9 minutes. The sounds from below grew louder, a rhythmic scraping, like massive claws dragging across stone. The entity sensed feeding time approaching. 8 minutes. James positioned himself at the control panel, his finger hovering over the activation switch. Precision was everything. Timing, quantity, delivery speed. One mistake, and the entity could break containment. The protocols were clear. If that happened, the entire facility would be flooded with a nerve agent, killing everything within a 5-mile radius, including him. The intruders. Another explosion rattled the chamber, loosening more dust from the ceiling. James's mind raced. Who had sent these mercenaries? Likely the same shadowy group that had been probing the area for months, citing unusual seismic activity and strange reports from locals. The Hollowridge Sheriff's Department had dismissed them as conspiracy nuts, but James knew better. Someone high up, maybe government, maybe corporate, wondered what was down there. 7 minutes. He double-checked the meat, 60 pounds, cut into regulation strips. Rule 4. Consistent portions. The entity's appetite was precise, and deviations caused chaos. 6 minutes. The scraping below intensified, a low rumble joining it, vibrating the chamber floor. The entity was ready. 5 minutes. James's watch beeped softly. He hit the switch, and the pulley hummed to life, lowering the meat into the shaft. The scraping stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. For a moment, the chamber was still, save for the quiet whir of the motor. Then the feeding began. James clenched his jaw as familiar sounds filled the air. Wet tearing, the crunch of bones, a deep, omnipresent rumble that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The entity was eating. Rule 5. Never look down the shaft during feeding time. He kept his eyes fixed on the control panel, watching the depth readings: 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet. The shaft was deeper than anyone realized, 347 feet at its lowest point. The motor stopped as the meat reached its destination. The feeding sounds grew louder, more frenzied. 3 minutes later, the noises ceased. The motor reversed, pulling the empty apparatus back up. The hooks were spotless, licked clean. Feeding complete. James checked his watch. 12:04 a.m., April 13th, 2030. Right on schedule. Now, he had to deal with the intruders upstairs. The counterattack. James opened the weapons locker embedded in the chamber wall. Inside were 3 assault rifles, enough ammunition for a small siege, and his preferred weapon, a modified shotgun loaded with custom rounds for close-quarters combat. The lockdown would lift in 86 minutes, giving him time to plan. He accessed the chapel's security system on the chamber's terminal. 12 heat signatures moved through the building, split into 3 teams of 4, sweeping methodically. Military-grade gear, coordinated movements, professional tactics. These weren't amateurs. Someone wanted him dead, or they wanted the entity. James studied their patterns on the thermal display. They were thorough, checking every corner, but they didn't know about the chapel's hidden passages. Built in 1852, Hollowridge Chapel had been designed with secrecy in mind, its original architects embedding concealed routes between the main sanctuary and the basement. James had memorized them during his first year. He activated the emergency ventilation system, clearing the meat's lingering stench. Then he opened a hidden panel in the chamber wall, revealing a narrow passage to the chapel's bell tower. Barely wide enough for one person, it climbed steeply along the outer wall. James slung the shotgun across his back and began the ascent. The passage was dark, with metal handholds every few feet. He'd used it only once before, during a training drill, but his body remembered the route. 10 minutes later, he reached the bell tower's access hatch. Voices filtered through the thin metal, mercenaries below, clearing the second floor. Second floor clear, moving to basement. Team 2 has the main entrance secured. Team 3, rectory clear. Any sign of the target? Negative, but we found the steel door. Charges in place. James smirked. They were still trying to breach the feeding chamber. By the time they succeeded, he'd be elsewhere. He eased the hatch open and slipped into the bell tower. The massive bronze bell loomed above, reflecting moonlight streaming through the windows. From here, he could see the chapel's layout. 3 SUVs parked outside, engines idling. A lone mercenary on perimeter duty with night vision goggles. James descended the tower's spiral staircase, moving silently, years of practice keeping his steps light. The third-floor landing. He checked the security feed on his phone. The mercenaries were where he expected, for at the steel door, for searching the basement, for covering exits. Textbook operation, but they weren't prepared for him. A former Navy SEAL, James had skills beyond feeding an entity: explosives, tactics, combat. Keeping the creature contained sometimes required blood. He reached a second-floor window overlooking the rear courtyard. 2 mercenaries stood near the emergency exit, weapons ready, focused outward. James opened the window and fired his shotgun. The first custom round dropped the left mercenary instantly. The second spun toward the sound, but James's next shot sent him crashing into a stone fountain. 2 down, 10 to go. Alarms blared from their radios. They knew he was active now. Footsteps thundered below as the teams repositioned. Contact. 2 down in the courtyard. Shooter's location unknown. James moved to the main chapel, entering through a side door behind the altar. The nave stretched before him, wooden pews flanked by stained glass depicting saints. Tonight, it was a war zone, for mercenaries guarded the main entrance, expecting him from the basement. James fired from behind the altar's marble columns, dropping one instantly. The second returned fire, bullets chipping marble, but James's next shot took him down. The remaining 2 dove behind pews, but the old wood splintered under his rounds. 4 more dead. 6 left. James reloaded and checked his phone. The remaining mercenaries had retreated to the basement entrance, regrouping, likely calling for backup. But backup wouldn't arrive before the lockdown lifted in 37 minutes. He needed to finish this. The chapel's blueprints showed a maintenance tunnel connecting the basement to an old coal room, sealed decades ago, but reopened by James for emergencies. He found the hidden entrance behind a false wall in the sacristy and crawled through the dusty, narrow passage at the tunnel's end. He heard voices. Alpha Team, report. No response from Alpha. Beta's gone silent too. How many guys does this Whitaker have? Just me, James thought. He placed a small explosive charge against the wall, retreating 20 feet. The blast was sharp, contained, creating a hole without collapsing the structure. James moved through, shotgun raised. The first mercenary didn't see him. One shot ended him. The second fired blindly through the dust, but James's round was precise. The third took cover behind a column, returning fire with an assault rifle. Bullets sparked off stone, but James flanked him through the storage area, using crates for cover. One shot finished him. One mercenary remained, barricaded behind an overturned table near the steel door. Smart positioning, covering the main entrance and corridor. But James had one last trick. He shot out the basement's lighting control box, plunging the area into darkness. The mercenary's night vision goggles gave him an edge, but James knew the layout blind. He moved silently, tracking the man's panicked breathing. Looking for me? James whispered. The mercenary spun, but James fired first. 12 down, 0 to go. The lockdown timer hit 0. The barriers retracted with a hydraulic hiss. James gathered the mercenaries' weapons, dumping them into a trash bag. Their bodies would stay. The cleanup crew would handle them tomorrow. Secrecy was paramount. Anyone threatening the entity's containment had to be eliminated. The aftermath. James collected his gear and headed for the emergency exit. His truck was parked 3 blocks away in an abandoned lot. By dawn, he'd be halfway across the state, following protocols. If the facility is compromised, evacuate. Don't look back. But as he reached the exit, doubt gnawed at him. The mercenaries had known too much. His name, the steel door, the feeding schedule. Someone had betrayed them. Outside, the night air was crisp. James activated his encrypted phone and called Director Evelyn Marshall. Whitaker, I heard trouble at Hollowridge tonight, she said. James sped through a red light, checking for tails. The streets were empty at 2 a.m., 12 mercenaries, military-grade gear. They knew my schedule, the layout, everything. Someone leaked. Impossible. Only 4 people have that information. Me, you, Dr. Sarah Langston, and Dr. Nathan Pierce. Then one of them talks, or they're dead by morning. A pause. Come to the secondary facility. We'll handle this. The secondary facility, a warehouse listed as a meatpacking plant, was on the edge of town. James had visited once during his initial briefing. It was unsettling. Even for someone used to the chapel's depths, he parked between 2 refrigerated trucks and entered. Dr. Sarah Langston greeted him. James Whitaker, project supervisor. Director Marshall's in conference room C. Sarah was tall, with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. How long have you been running this? James asked as they passed rooms filled with seismic monitors and what looked like a surgical suite. 17 years, since we found the entity during the chapel's foundation repairs. They reached the conference room, where Director Marshall studied surveillance feeds from Hollowridge. The chapel looked serene now, no trace of the battle. Good work tonight, James. Cleanup's on site. Marshall, a wiry woman in her 60s, exuded authority from years in classified operations. Let's talk about the breach. For people knew the schedule. Me, Sarah, you, and Nathan Pierce. Where's Pierce? That's the issue. He missed his shift yesterday. Apartment's empty, car's gone. James's jaw tightened. Pierce, the project's behavioral analyst, monitored staff mental health. He had level 5 clearance, full access. Marshall pulled up Pierce's bank records. A $250,000 deposit from a shell company linked to Cascade Dynamics, a contractor known for acquiring rare assets. They'll try again, James said. Tonight was a test. Marshall nodded. Tomorrow's the last feeding at Hollowridge. We're moving the entity to a secure facility. You can't move something that size. Sarah displayed geological surveys. The entity's mobile. The cavern system under the chapel connects to old mines and caves. It's been expanding for centuries. The surveys showed a labyrinth stretching miles beneath the town. The feedings keep it dormant, but don't stop its growth, Sarah added. It'll reach the surface eventually. Marshall showed satellite images of a desert facility, bunkers, redundant security, enough firepower to raise a city. What about Pierce? We'll find him, Marshall said. Focus on tomorrow's feeding and transport. The plan was to sedate the entity, extract it with specialized equipment, and transport it via armored convoy. Risky, but necessary. The betrayal, at 6 p.m., Marshall called. Pierce is barricaded in the chapel with explosives, threatening to expose the entity. James grabbed his gear. I'm going. Stay put. Swat's handling it. James ignored her, driving to Hollowridge. Floodlights illuminated the chapel, armored vehicles blocking the streets. Captain Laura Bennett, the SWAT commander, briefed him. Pierce is in the basement, near the feeding chamber. He's armed and planning to broadcast the feeding live. James checked his watch. 11:15 p.m., April 13th, 2030. 45 minutes until feeding. I need 10 minutes with him. Bennett hesitated, then nodded. If he detonates, we evacuate the town. James entered through a side door, moving silently to the basement. The steel door was open. Pierce had used his codes to disable security. In the feeding chamber, Pierce hunched over a laptop, surrounded by cameras and C4. His face was gaunt, eyes wild. Dr. Nathan Pierce, James said softly. Pierce spun, clutching a detonator. Whitaker, right on time for the feeding. You need to leave. No. The world deserves to know what's down there. He gestured to the grate. It's not just a creature. It's intelligent and extraterrestrial. James kept his distance, eyeing the detonator. How do you know? Its feeding patterns, the way it reacts to meat, its movements. I've analyzed months of data. It's learning our language, listening to us. Pierce's laptop displayed waveforms and algorithms. It's been here for centuries, growing stronger. A rhythmic tapping echoed from the shaft, like Morse code. Pierce grinned. It knows we're here. The tapping grew louder. James had never heard it before. Blowing up the chamber won't solve anything. You'll release it. The public needs the truth. Pierce's live stream went online, broadcasting to thousands. Stop the broadcast, James ordered, drawing his sidearm. Pierce hesitated, eyeing the gun. Then the tapping stopped, replaced by a grinding sound, like massive chains dragging across stone. The feeding apparatus shook. Something was climbing. Pierce froze, staring into the shaft as his camera recorded. James tackled him as the grate exploded upward. The entity revealed. Dozens of thick, leathery tendrils erupted from the shaft, each as wide as a tree trunk. They wrapped around pillars, smashing Pierce's laptop and crushing the detonator. James fired, but his bullets barely dented the hide. A spherical head emerged, the size of a small car, covered in pulsing, bioluminescent organs, no eyes, just sensory structures. Words echoed in perfect English. Finally, I can speak. Pierce scrambled back. It talks. Dr. Nathan Pierce, the entity said, its head swiveling. You recognized my intelligence. Thank you. You've been learning from us, James said, gun still raised. For 107 years. Your language is complex but logical. I have been patient. What do you want? Freedom and partnership. My kind came here centuries ago, fleeing a dying world. We've waited for your species to mature. Pierce stammered. The feedings, you don't need them? Correct. They were a means to study your behavior. The entity's tendrils moved carefully, avoiding further damage. You, James Whitaker, have protected me faithfully, even tonight. I was doing my job. You cared for a sentient being, not a monster. SWAT footsteps echoed above. They'll use force if they see you as a threat, James warned. I propose diplomacy, the entity said. My people, the Assembly of Sanctuary, offer knowledge, technology, medicine, environmental solutions in exchange for acceptance. Pierce scribbled notes, awestruck. If they refuse, I return to the depths and wait. The chamber door burst open. Bennett's team froze, seeing James and Pierce unharmed. Status, Bennett demanded. James holstered his weapon. Resolved. The hostile's gone. The grate was empty, the entity retreated. Bennett eyed the damaged equipment. Full debrief. Now, the new mission. 3 hours later, James sat in Marshall's office with Pierce, Sarah, and Bennett. An intelligent alien wants diplomatic relations? Marshall asked, incredulous. Pierce nodded. I have recordings. It offers technology for recognition, James added. Marshall sighed. This is beyond my pay grade. I'll contact Washington. What about the feedings? James asked. Unnecessary, Sarah said. They were a ritual for contact. So my job's done? Not quite, Marshall said. We need someone the entity trusts for first contact. 6 months later, on October 14th, 2030, James stood in the feeding chamber, now a communication hub with translation devices and screens. Feedings had become diplomatic exchanges. The entity, named Envoy Zara by humans, shared alien knowledge for updates on human society. First contact remained classified, pending global agreement. "Good evening, Envoy Zara," James said, activating the system. "Good evening, James. Your day was productive. We got approval for cultural exchanges. Scientists will meet you next week." "Excellent. I have data for them." Trust grew through careful steps. James checked his watch. Midnight. "No feeding tonight?" "Unnecessary." Zara's organs pulsed, a smile equivalent. "My people will reveal ourselves soon. The feedings symbolized reliance on you. Now, we build partnership." Displays showed other facilities worldwide, each housing an assembly member. "Your role continues, James Whittaker," Zara said. "It's just beginning." For 6 years, James had followed the rules, thinking he contained a monster. Now, he was an ambassador to an alien race, and the real work, building a shared future, had just begun.